welcome back to Penniacwilderness. Today I am sharpening some blades for my sawmill. About, 3 months ago or so, I started sharpening my own blades, which has been a huge improvement for running my sawmill. Before I got this, which is the Woodland Mill's RS30 Pro, I basically was doing what I think a lot of people do, is finding someone who could sharpen my blades. And so I was paying somewhere between $10 and $12 a blade, sometimes less if I sharpened or had multiple sharpened at a time. But that added up. And then just where I live, it's not always easy to find someone who A, sharpens blades, and B, has time to sharpen them when I sort of need them sharpened. Plus driving to get the blades delivered and picking them up, it added up in terms of cost. And sometimes as a result, I have had to just buy new blades over the time I've had a mill. So I'll take this blade off, but what I was saying is eventually I got to a point where I decided it was really worth getting a sharpener of my own. And so I got this one from Woodland Mills, and it's been a great addition to my sawmill setup. So I think the best way to show how this works is really just probably to put a blade on and walk through. With the blades that you're going to sharpen, one thing I've learned is the cleaner they are, the better, because as the sharpener moves the blade around, there's multiple places that the blade's contacting the sharpener, and having the blade smooth just allows that move to go a little smoother. So I just wipe it off with a rag. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it doesn't take long to clean it off. Next is putting the blade on the sharpener. So the way I do it is the sharpener has two arms that are adjustable in length, and then on the end of each arm there's a series of bearings that the blade is guided through as the sharpener advances the blade. So this is pretty straightforward. The owner's manual will give you the instructions in terms of how far you should have the arms extended based on the type of blade you're sharpening, and also how high you should have the bearings positioned so that you have the blade in the same plane as the sharpener. Basically just slide the blade into the bearings, and you can see that this one's moving around no problem. Okay, so the next step is going to be to put the blade into the sawmill blade sharpener. Before I do that, I'm just going to go through the parts that I think are important to know here. Going from the right side to the left side, you have an in-feed arm, which is this black arm here that has a bearing on the end. Next is this washer, which Woodland Mills calls the fender washer. I'm using the same terms they use in the manual, so that hopefully that'll be useful if you're learning to sharpen blades. Next is the backrest. So the backrest is this plate here that extends from the right-hand side of the sharpener to the left. This movable piece, because I haven't got it tightened yet, is called the pressure plate. That's going to hold the blade in place. And then the next part here, which is, I guess, the more complicated part, is the advancer. So the advancer is powered by an electric motor that's run off of my car battery. And the advancer is mounted to the blade sharpener on this profile cam. So the profile cam is this somewhat circular piece here, but it's not exactly circular. And the reason it isn't circular is it's built so that the advancer moves in a way that follows the contour of the sawmill blade. So the sawmill blade has a certain contour to the tooth, and this cam allows the sharpener to follow the contour of that tooth. And the sharpener itself comes with, I think it was 2 other profile cams, so that you can sharpen different types of blades other than the one I have on here today. So let's get the blade mounted, and then I'll continue to walk through how this works. So the first thing I would do is just move the grinding head out of the way. So you can see here that the grinding head has a grinding disc on it, an electric motor. The electric motor plugs into the base of the sharpener. And so to put the blade into the sharpener, just a few things you have to do. So what I try to do first is you often need to move the advancer arm out of the way. And then you slide the blade between the pressure plate and the backrest. Then you slide it between the fender washer and the backrest, while making sure that it is supported by the infeed arm. So what that does is it straightens the blade out as it comes into the sharpening area of the sharpener. And then I just snug up the pressure plate. You want it tight enough, but not so tight that the advancer isn't able to move the blade. So then after, again, you've got the blade between the pressure plate and the backrest, between the fender washer and the backrest, and up against the infeed arm guide bearing. And you have the pressure plate snugged up against the blade. The next thing I'm going to do is just check to see how the advancer is working. So I'll put the power onto my car battery. So just in terms of the settings on the control panel, so I mentioned that there's a power on button, power off button. There's a 2-speed dial for the speed the blade moves through. So I would always start on the low speed, but you can flip that to high speed. And then there's 2 larger buttons here. One is for the advancer, so it moves the advancer forward, and the other is for the grinding head. I'm going to turn on the advancer and we'll see how it works. So there's some pretty smart engineering going on here. Is the advancer arm pushes the sawmill blade tooth forward, and it does that following the profile of this cam. And then because of that profile, when I do put the grinding head down, the grinding head then will be able to follow the profile of the sawmill blade and take off just a little bit of each tooth to sharpen it. So I'll show you, if you have the pressure plate too tight, the engine will sound not as good. Hear that little bit of whining there? Versus if I just back off a little bit. It's a subtle difference, but you'll get to feel and you'll get to be able to hear the difference. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the grinding head, and then I'll talk about how you adjust things. So the grinding head pivots, and when you're actually sharpening, you have it in the down position. And on the side of the grinding head is a depth adjustment rod, and that depth adjustment rod sits into a little pocket on the advancer assembly. And as the advancer assembly moves, that pocket will move up and down, and that up and down movement translates the advancer's action to the action of the grinding head, and then allows the grinding head to follow the contour of the sawmill blade. From the back side of the grinding head, it attaches to the base of the sharpener here, and there's a handle that you can loosen, and there's 3 angle adjustments. So whether you're milling frozen lumber, softwoods, hardwoods, or a mix, you can pick the 7, 10, or 14 degree angle. Mostly what I do is 10 degree, so then you can set it there. Now we'll talk about adjustment. So back up a little bit. I have everything set up, and the advancer is pushing the sawmill blade forward. So the next thing I want to do is move the grinding head down, making sure that the depth adjustment rod sits into the pocket on the top of the advancer assembly. And the pocket, so this is a depth adjustment rod here that I'm pointing to with my pencil, and the pocket that it sits into is right here. And you may need to adjust the position of this plate using this screw to make sure that it'll sit there. And that depth adjustment rod will translate that motion to the grinding assembly. A couple terms for sharpening that will be useful. So you have your tooth here. So there's going to be a gap between the grinding wheel and the tooth. So the side of the grinding wheel and the side of the tooth. And then the other gap is the gap between the bottom of the grinding disc and the gullet. The gullet being the bottom where the tooth meets the blade. And so you want to set these up so that both of those gaps are flush and that there's not a gap. So I'm going to want ultimately the grinding disc, the edge of the grinding disc to be flush with the edge of the tooth, and the bottom of the grinding disc to be flush with the top of the gullet. So I'll turn on the advancer and show you where things are at right now. So there's at least several millimeters of wheel to tooth gap, and then there's also several millimeters of gap between the wheel and the gullet. So we'll need to adjust that using the adjustments on the sharpener. What you're eventually going to be trying to do is just take a little bit off the tooth, from the top of the tooth down to the little ways into the gullet, and that's how you'll sharpen a tooth. The sharpener has two adjustment knobs, so one on the advancer and one on the depth rod, which is part of the grinding head. So what I'll do, I'm going to loosen the depth rod, and sometimes I'll actually do this as the advancer is moving. And as I loosen it, you'll notice that the grinding disc gets closer to the gullet. Okay, so we're pretty close now in terms of the gap between the wheel and the gullet. The other adjustment that we need to do is adjusting this knob on the advancer arm, and that's going to help us with the tooth to wheel gap. So you can watch now. You can think of it that the advancer is pushing the tooth too far. So I'm going to loosen the adjustment on the advancer. So that it doesn't push the blade quite as far. And you can see that these two adjustments, you just need to keep fine-tuning them a little bit more until everything's flush. And so you might not hear it on the video, but I can hear that there's just a little bit of contact between the grinding disc and the blade. And so I would consider this pretty good. And then the next thing I'm going to do is turn on the grinding disc. So then with the grinding head down, your adjustments very close, I turn on the advancer, and then I turn on the grinding disc, and we'll see what happens. And so to start, I think that my gap between the wheel and the tooth is not bad, but I need to make it a little better gap between the wheel and the gullet. So I just adjust the depth rod for that. So again, if I loosen this depth rod, it's going to allow the grinding head to drop down a little bit more. Now you can see, but you can also hear the difference. And so I'm not an expert at doing this, but I have been doing it for the last few months. And now what I would do is just allow the blade to continue moving through. So I'm just going to let this blade sharpen on low speed. I'll turn it to high speed in a little bit. And then I'm going to go around and just show you the different angles of the sharpening, so that if you're doing this yourself, you can hopefully use this video as a bit of a guide. What I'm not exactly sure of is how much I should be taking off with each drop of the grinding head. Woodland Mills gives you an estimation in terms of amount, which is a bit hard to measure. I just try to take what I consider to be a little bit, and then if I want to take more on a second pass, I can. So I'll let it sharpen and show you some footage of what it all looks like. All right, so I've been running the sharpener in slow speed. I've probably got a third of the blade done. I'll just show you the difference between the slow speed and the high speed, because it is quite a difference. For the most part, I do sharpen these in slow speed. And I probably do that just because if something happened, the blade wasn't moving smoothly, then to me, I can catch the error quicker. But I have also used high speed and not had any problems from it. But I'll show you the difference. So, and then this is high speed. The last thing I'll show you, which I think is a pretty clever piece of engineering, is this attachment that you put on the blade, and it will automatically stop as the blade's finished, because this piece will hit the on-off switches and stop the sharpening. It just sits on the blade. What I do is I put it on the teeth that have been sharpened already, slide it in, and then what it's supposed to do is hit these two switches as it comes through and shut the sharpener off. And that shuts it off. And so that's a walkthrough of how I sharpen blades. To take the blade off is pretty straightforward. I flip the grinding head out of the way, flip the advancer out of the way, loosen the pressure plate, slide the blade out, and then take it out of the guide bearings on the arms. And now I have a much sharper blade, and should be good for milling later today. Hope this video is helpful. I did try to walk through in a fair amount of detail. I do find the Woodland Mills manuals are excellent, but sometimes visualizing it on a video can help as well. So yeah, thanks for watching the video. I would say at this point, so I mentioned earlier that there's a cost thing here. So the blade sharpener has a certain amount of cost to it, but so does the cost of buying blades and sharpening blades, and paying someone else to sharpen blades. That's one angle. But another angle that I think helps me now that I have a sharpener is I don't run my blades as long. So I'm able to, when I start to notice my blade getting dull, whereas in the past I might keep pushing the blade longer than I should, knowing that I have to pay to get it sharpened. Now I can pop that blade off, put it on the sharpener, and have a fresh blade again in 5 minutes or something like that. And I think that just makes me mill better lumber and do a better job at what I'm doing. So that's another thing. So take care. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Penniac Wilderness.